Hello everybody. For people of a certain generation, like myself, the worlds of video games and motoring will forever be intertwined. After all, without the likes of Gran Turismo, I would have no interest whatsoever in a Nissan Skyline GTR. And they'd probably still be 30 grand. Likewise, it is impossible to discuss my Toyota Celica without talking about Sega Rally. And I suspect that Forza Horizon is doing as much to inspire the next generation of petrolheads as Formula 1 can ever hope to achieve. But there is one game that holds a very special place in my heart, to some slightly obscure and to others fondly remembered. That was the Ferrari F355 challenge, as seen in the arcades, though I played it on my Dreamcast. This is a real Ferrari F355 challenge. It's road legal and I get to drive it. If you haven't subscribed already, now is the time to do so, because with the support of people like yourself, these things can happen. Today's going to be a very good day. As you might imagine, the F355 Challenge is a curious beastie. It is a race car designed to take part in Ferrari's One Make Challenge series. The idea being all of the cars are made to equal specifications, and really it's a way for people to go racing with a brand they have an affinity for and develop a connection with the factory that's a little bit more than just buying cars from your local dealer. The F355 Challenge cars were retired around 2000, being replaced by the then new 360 Challenge cars. Today, you can still see these cars being competed, often seen alongside the modern Challenge car based on the 488. However, the two are as different as you could possibly get. You see, mention Challenge to anyone, and the car they're likely to think of is the 360-based Challenge Stradale. That was a road car inspired by the racing version of the 360 Modena. However, there was no equivalent for the F355, for one very simple reason. The road and race car are the same. Though later on it was possible to buy a Challenge racer directly from the factory, that wasn't always the case, and that's not how the majority of these cars came to be. Instead, what you did if you wanted to take your Ferrari racing was buy a standard F355 GTB, that's the Berlinetta, take it to your dealer and have the Challenge kit fitted. The cost of that is somewhat difficult to find now, but I believe it was around the £25,000 mark. Bear in mind, back then, one of these new would have set you back less than 100 grand, so we're still talking quite a bit of money compared to the value of the car. It's also important to note that the basis of these cars is the F355 Berlinetta, not the 355. The difference is subtle, but to Ferrari geeks quite important. The reason this car has an F at the front is because it's a manual. When the F1 gearbox was introduced, Ferrari decided maybe that was an F too many, so those cars are badged as the 355 F1. So then, what does it take to turn an F355 into an F355 Challenge? That is also a difficult question to answer, because over the years the specification changed, ending up with what they call the Evo cars. However, common to all of them were these beautiful magnesium speedline alloys, the enormous 14-inch brakes from an F40, which are odd-looking things on account of the fact that they have a very, very large central bell. You also had race-specific modifications, including things like a cut-off switch, fire extinguisher, a little sticker telling you where the hidden door handle is. You also have a different clutch, an uprated oil and fuel system, solid bushing throughout, different suspension including different springs, though the dampers I haven't been able to ascertain. I know today the race cars do use different dampers, but in period I'm not sure if they did. These still have the little red tops that the road cars did, but this certainly rides very different to your standard F355. Early in the car's run, you also saw the introduction of the now famous Challenge grille. That's a piece for the rear which replaces a solid item with one full of holes for better ventilation. Inside, the cars were fully stripped out and given a lightweight competition bucket seat and a roll cage. The wing, I believe, was part of the later specifications, and I have to say, I wasn't sure how the car would look with it, but I think it's gorgeous. In fact, this entire thing is stunning. One item that was left unchanged though was the engine, which is absolutely fine by me, because as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the greatest road car engines of all time. Though its power outputs may be modest by today's standards, 380 PS, 268 pound-foot of torque, that's 363 Newton meters, it is a technological tour de force of its day. That power came from just 3.5 litres of displacement, 8 cylinders with, of course, natural aspiration. You had 8 individual throttle bodies, 5 valves per cylinder, which was an innovation for the 355 and where it gets its name from. 3.5 litres, 5 valves per cylinder. You also have titanium conrods and a red line beyond 8,500 RPM. This is a performance engine of the old school. The history of this particular car is quite curious. It was built in 1995, so is a fairly early example, and is in the stunning shade of Rosso Barchetta, which I last saw on an F50. And in both cases, it looks superb. It is considerably darker than Rosso Corsa and is more of a lipstick red, though the camera may not be doing it justice. It was commissioned potentially for an Italian politician, though we don't know whether he had it converted or it was done before that. In any case, the car allegedly has never been raced. It certainly had the full specification because inside there are still remnants of where it used to have a cage, but today you'd be hard pressed to tell. This is going to present me a particular problem because at a few points in the past I've thought of having a car quite like this. On account of Ferrari never making an F355 Challenge Stradale, I figured why not take an F355 and build one. After all, many of the parts are still available to buy now, so it's not at all impossible. What I did instead was buy the second 430 Scuderia, so there's a good chance that by the end of today I may be full of regret. After all, this is a car that once upon a time St. Clarkson himself called the greatest car in the world ever. And at points I have been inclined to agree with him. So then, is it possible that this car could be the greatest car in the world ever, but better? Let's find out. There are certain cars that I've been lucky enough to experience a number of times over my driving life, and so when I go to revisit them, it feels like putting on a pair of comfy and familiar old slippers. One is the BMW E46 in really all of its guises, another is the 996 Generation 911, and also there's this, the Ferrari F355, and I suppose by extension the 355. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to drop the F for the rest of this because it's getting a little bit tiring. I think Ferrari pedants by now will have realised I know what I'm talking about. Incidentally, Ferrari people tend to give me a lot less harder time when I get things like that wrong compared with Porsche types. Those of you who've been following the channel for a very long time will know that somebody in my family has a 355. It was actually the first supercar I ever got to experience from either seat, really. It was the first Ferrari that I ever drove, and it's a car that is still owned by the same family member, and I remember very, very fondly. On a few rare occasions, I have been fortunate enough to drive said car. In fact, one of the earliest videos on the channel was me driving that car and comparing it with my then new Lotus Evora 400. Before we get on to what makes this car different, because it still has the interior of a regular 355, sitting in it brings back so many happy memories and reminds me of just why I love this model quite so much. The view out is absolutely spectacular. It's not a shapely bonnet like you get in a 360 or a 458, but it does give you a phenomenal view of the road. In fact, visibility all round is one of the 355's strengths. Because of this U-shaped rear window with the buttresses behind, you can see forward, side and behind you, which in any kind of sports car now is quite unusual. This interior is very similar to that in the 348 with really only minor differences. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, the big ones are the slightly different seats that are much better and the addition of a 6th gear. This car does have a couple of alterations, most notably the red cutoff key down here, but beyond that, it's all very familiar, business as usual. Gorgeous, classic Veglia dials, including a little trio here, which I must say I really love. And having dials in the centre here, to me, is a real key thing to have in any old school supercar. It's one of the reasons that I made my first Ferrari a 550, because that has those too. But what the 550 doesn't have is this soundtrack. Best day at work ever. I love these things. Now, as I said, they're not actually a particularly potent thing. 380 horsepower and not all that much torque. The 550 is some 100 horsepower up, but does weigh another couple of 100 kilos more. These are around the sort of 1500 kilo mark, the 550 just over 1700 kilos. However, you must remember that car is some 50% up on torque, so it delivers a very different style of driving experience. This is far more restrained. The power is very smooth and linear all the way to that 8,500 plus red line. The gearbox is beautiful. This car's on less than 20,000 miles. My 550 is on over 100,000, and that does show. Even when cold, second gear is present and correct. That's very unusual for a Ferrari, and the rest of them are cooperative too. Every now and again there will be someone, if they haven't already, who'll comment on a video when I feature a car like this saying, oh, well, you know, manuals, they're just worse because they're slower, or oh, silly gated shifters, they're not quite as quick as the one in my S2000. No, they're not. But they are brilliant. This is the thing you have to understand about a car like this. Some people can wrap their head around it, some people can't, and I'm really sorry about the reverberations. That's a function of the race exhaust. As far as I can tell, it sounds pretty similar to a stock 355 exhaust. The difference, I believe, is that the stock exhaust is valved. In fact, it was the first road car ever to have a valved exhaust. Here, I think they've just done away with that, so it sounds absolutely glorious at all times. Really well judged. This, to me, is the perfect volume and tone. But at low RPM, you do get this drone, you get this resonance in here all the time, which I suppose would be frustrating if you did try and daily it. But then, if you were daily driving a 355 challenge car, would you really care about that? No, I suppose not. The other item that appears to be non-functional, and I could really be doing with, is the air conditioning. In a 355, it's generally very good. In fact, most Ferraris, the AC is excellent. The heating, not so much. But in here, the heater works, the AC doesn't. I would expect, given the fact that this car was daily driven in Italy, that it still has AC. Maybe it just needs looking at. Speaking of Italian, this driving position is certainly that. So, to drive a 355, you have to adapt yourself to the car. The seat will go forwards, backwards, tilt, also has bolster adjustment too, but that's about it. The steering wheel doesn't really do all that much. You know, I had a train of thought a couple of minutes ago, and I must apologise, because I seem to have lost it. A musical interlude then. It is glorious music, isn't it? Absolutely delightful. I have to say, the competition clutch this car has, though it's a touch on the grabby side, is actually not all that bad. These are a fairly friendly car to drive for a 25-year-old supercar. Though, because of its age, there are a few things this car does without. They include traction control, stability control, airbags, and just about any other driver's aid really, save for ABS. If you are thinking of doing what I'm thinking of doing, in other words, converting a challenge car back to road use, that is something you need to keep an eye on, because many of them have had the ABS stripped out. The response, of course, is excellent, and in fact the throttle pedal here is quite light. Many Ferrari throttles of this era are a little on the heavy side. My 550 is one of the worst examples, but right-hand drive 355s are also pretty bad, because the throttle cable goes over there, up the front, around, back, and then to the engine. Here, it's a little bit more direct, so it's a little bit more free. Now, if you've stayed around for that long, let's treat you to a little bit of second gear, shall we? It's gripping nicely, this car. should be able to do that within the speed limit. Let's see. And here we go. Let's get down to nitty-gritty, shall we? The good stuff. Brakes. They're astonishing. Those massive 14-inch F40 derived stoppers. First off, let's be honest here. You want to be able to tell people you've got F40 brakes on your car, don't you? Because I would. But more than that, they're feelsome, they're interactive, and oh my, they've got plenty of bite. More so, I think, than I can really explore on these tyres and on this road. Wow. In truth, I never really had a problem with regular 355 brakes, but of course, this is something put on for racing. Oh, carving this car through these roads is an absolute delight. A big thank you to my friend Anthony from the channel Sports and Touring, and also my second channel, JAYEMM Friends. He today is playing the role of the other girl, so has been driving this for some of the drive-by shots. I seem to keep throwing the poor chap in the deep end because I got him to drive his first ever 911, and that was a 992 GT3. He's never driven a 355 before. In fact, the majority of the Ferraris he's driven have been my own, and now I'm chucking him in with a challenge car. He loves this sort of stuff though, because he likes cars to be loud, low, stiff, a little bit raw. But the shocker of this car is that it isn't really anywhere near as that as I thought it was going to be. I genuinely expected when I picked this car up this morning for the guys to say, look, we had to take the challenge suspension off, it was too much, or yeah, okay, you can drive it, but you're not going to enjoy it. They have some full-on race cars that I hope to be driving soon. Well, this I suppose is that, but I mean like proper, more modern-day, serious, still stripped-out looking race cars. And those they say I can drive on the road, but I definitely won't enjoy. Might do it though anyway. Should I do it? I probably should do it, shouldn't I? If I was going to build a car like this, and I am sorely tempted, it would be very similar to this example, though right-hand drive. The major difference, I think, for me would be I'd like some bucket seats. These are actually much better than you'd expect. For standard seats, they are brilliant, quite supportive, particularly if you dial up the bolstering. But carbon ones would look cool in here. You could actually order those from factory, but very, very few people did. Well, we're going through a bit of town. Let's talk about some more boring stuff. How much would you pay for one of these? Well, not as much as you might think. You could do it one of two ways. I suppose the easiest is to buy an existing challenge car, which is going to set you back between £100,000 and £150,000. If you're willing to live with left-hand drive, you're going to be paying a lot less. Right-hand drive examples are considerably rarer, particularly factory-built ones. Or you could buy a 355 and essentially do this yourself, with likely a combination of original parts and also some aftermarket stuff, where the original parts are now harder to find. The holy grail of 355 challenge parts are the steering rack and the pump from the Evo cars. Those fix what is the 355's Achilles heel in both regular guys and here. That's the steering. It was one of Ferrari's earliest attempts at power steering, and they just didn't get it right. With the 550, they nailed it, but here they just missed the mark. It's a little bit too light. Actually, it's a lot too light. It doesn't really have that much feel, and the rack is far too slow. That being said though, for all the other things this car does, I think I can just about look past the steering, though it would be something if I owned one of these I would have to fix, because good steering in a car like this is absolutely essential to me. The left-hand drive thing, funnily enough, really isn't bugging me anywhere near as much as I thought it would. The gearbox I'm really getting on with, even the pedals, and I know it might sound stupid, but when I get in left-hand drive cars I often struggle with the pedals, and I really shouldn't, because they're clearly still laid out the same way, but sometimes I do. Don't ask why, that's just the case. Here, not a problem. The excellent visibility certainly contributes, as does the fact that the 355 is not a big car. I parked my 430 next to it this morning because Anthony had borrowed that over the weekend, and there's quite a size difference. When Ferrari moved from this to the 360, they leapt up in size. The 360 and 430 share chassis, so they're essentially identical in terms of dimensions. It It is for that reason, and others, that many people consider this really to be one of the last classic Ferraris. It's still built with the tubular steel chassis at its heart. The body panels are aluminium. Yes, the 360 still use this engine, but I have to say here, it does sound just that little bit better. That apparently is mostly thanks to the intake rather than anything with the exhaust. Brakes do squeal a bit. They grumble a lot too. So do the ceramics in the scud. It makes me a happy man, this car. A very, very happy man. Anyway, now we're on to one of my favourite bits of road in one of my favourite cars. Excuse me a moment. Just right, this thing. It really, really is. If I put my foot down that much in the 430, I'd be going, whoa, no, whoa, easy boy, whoa, calm it down. Here, no. Yeah, sure, it doesn't have traction control. The only real aids you've got are your foot, your brain, and a limited slip diff out the back. Beyond that, you're on your own. But even so, I don't feel scared of this. In fact, I'd say I feel keener and happier to put my foot down here than I do in the 550. Even with modern tyres that are in good condition, the 550's rear end does like to step out on occasion. Happily, that car does have traction control, but it's quite early, basic mid-90s traction, so not really all that good to man or beast. I have to say, it is the suspension I'm most impressed with. That was the bit I thought was really going to knacker this experience. But it's fabulous. You get a little extra sense of tautness at all times, but the regular 355 was so supple, and in some ways actually quite soft, that I think the car could afford to have become a little bit stiffer. There is a button down here for the suspension which will engage its sports mode. I'm going to try that now. Oh, and the light actually still works. Not really sure it's done anything. It might have. Didn't seem to do much. I'm going to leave that alone, I think. Just about the only thing you really do have to look out for with this car, and this is no different to a regular F355, is ground clearance. They were always pretty low cars with a fairly dramatic overhang, meaning just about anything from rocks in the road to bits of mud, the odd bit of roadkill, and certainly multi-storey car parks can cause you some concern. I live a very privileged and lucky life. I get to play with awfully nice things all the time. And when it comes to revisiting cars like this, that I've got such a high opinion of, I'm always concerned that now the experience I have means that I'll see it in a different light. I won't enjoy it as much as I used to. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every time I get back into a 355, I'm reminded of just how wonderful it is. I suppose really, how you feel about a car like this is going to fall into one of two camps. Either it's a silly, old, badly made, overpriced Italian lump that isn't even that quick. And I suppose you could say some of that is true, though I dispute the fact that they're badly made. I think in the context of the 1990s, they're pretty good. Not quite as well screwed together as some of the other German stuff, like say a Merc or a BM, but compared with Porsche of the era, they're not really that far off. So, okay, I can kind of get. I'm doing 2,500 RPM now in fourth gear, which is translating to about 30 mile an hour or so. The Alpine A110 that I've currently got on loan, put your foot down, the car will just go. Here, there you go. Not shoving you back, but it does eventually move. You have to work with this car, you've got to drive it. And for people that are willing to do that, I think this would really appeal. But you know what? Even that actually doesn't matter to me, because as human beings, we're often looking for that next adrenaline hit, that next thing that interests us, whatever it may be, whether it's the fastest car out there or the most exciting and rare Pokemon card. You're always looking for something better. That's simply human nature. And the problem with buying new stuff is that there will always be something better, something newer, something faster, something shinier will always come along, no matter what it is that you have. So for me, buying new cars, particularly performance ones, is a bit of a tricky business because whatever you get is inevitably going to be tomorrow's fish and chip paper. Look at an old car and its place in history is already assured. So the 355, and specifically this F355 Challenge, this is a beautiful, old school, one of the last real old school Ferraris. It is a stunning thing. I've been driving around in it and also near to it all morning. Seeing this in the rearview mirror made me so happy. And I wasn't even driving it. Now I'm driving it and I'm happier again. It will always be a really pretty car. It will always be one of the best sounding cars ever. And for me, it will always be the greatest car in the world ever. And here, in Berlinetta F355 Challenge form, I think it's at its absolute best. This car's very kind owners might just have cost me an awful lot of money. Regardless, a big thanks to them for lending me the car, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.